So imagine this. A local organization raises, I don't know, $50,000, right?
Okay, that's a good chunk of change.
Yeah. And they mobilize like 200 eager volunteers. And they just successfully launch 3 brand new community outreach programs in a single month.
Wow.
Right. I mean, they're taking photos, they're updating their newsletters, slapping high fives all around.
Naturally.
But according to the really incredible source material we are unpacking today, they might have actually just failed entirely.
Yeah.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are exploring why the absolute most dangerous thing, any organization can do is confuse momentum with direction.
It is a terrifying thought, isn't it? Because that scenario you just described, it completely feels like
Oh,
success.
absolutely. It looks great on paper.
Right. It looks like success on a quarterly report. But there is this profound paradigm shift we're looking at today. It's called missions ministry mapping.
Okay.
And the core premise is that we actually find a tremendous amount of psychological comfort in the noise of activity.
Because it feels like we're doing something.
Exactly. We love being busy because, well, being busy distracts us from the very real, terrifying possibility that we have absolutely no idea where we are going.
That distinction right there, I mean, that's the entire mission of our conversation today. We are looking at this extensive framework on how to stop running in place.
Yeah.
And whether you are a leader in a faith-based ministry, or maybe running a nonprofit, or even directing a corporate team, the tension is identical.
It really is universal.
You have these deep core convictions. You want to make an impact. But somehow translating those convictions into real-world execution, it usually turns into this scattershot mess.
Yeah, you end up exhausted.
Right. You're burning all these calories on the treadmill, sweating, but your actual scenery hasn't changed in 3 years.
Which brings us to what the source describes as the quiet crisis.
The quiet crisis. I love that term.
Right. And it's quiet specifically because from the outside, a busy organization looks completely healthy.
Right. No one is sounding the alarm if the calendar is full.
Exactly. The breakdown doesn't happen because people lack compassion or, because they're lazy.
No, they're working incredibly hard.
The breakdown happens because they confuse activity with alignment.
So let's really dig into that illusion of activity, because it is just so seductive.
Oh, very much so.
Think about a typical community center or maybe a church. You look at the weekly bulletin, and there are like 15 different announcements.
Right. It's packed.
Yeah, there's a bake sale for a global charity, a short-term volunteer trip, a generic prayer request for the nations, a clothing drive.
Just a constant stream of events.
And it provides this immediate dopamine hit. Everyone walks away feeling emotionally satisfied, thinking, look at us, we're doing so much good.
Yeah.
But doing a lot of things is not the same as having clarity.
No, it's not. And that's what the text calls the trap of generic support.
Generic support.
Yeah. When a group lacks a clear, deeply researched map of what they are actually trying to achieve, they inevitably default to giving broadly.
Just to feel safe.
Exactly, to feel safe. They spread their financial resources, their volunteer hours, and their mental bandwidth over dozens of completely disconnected initiatives.
It's the peanut butter approach.
That peanut butter approach.
Yeah, like you just spread it as thin as possible across the entire piece of bread so you can confidently say you covered it.
Oh, that's a great way to visualize it.
But the layer is so thin you can't even taste it. It doesn't actually change the sandwich.
Right, right. And people operate this way because the sentiment is noble. I mean, they genuinely want to help everyone.
There, the intentions are good.
But the unintended consequence of that noble sentiment is that the support becomes so diffused, it doesn't enact any meaningful structural change anywhere.
A mile wide and a millimeter deep.
Exactly.
But wait, hold on. Let's look at this from the perspective of the people actually doing the work.
Okay.
If I'm a volunteer and I'm pooling my money with my community to send a team overseas, or I'm spending my entire Saturday sorting donated clothes.
Yeah, that's real effort.
Right. You're telling me that's a failure. Because to the vast majority of people, that just looks like beautiful, genuine generosity.
It does.
Isn't doing something always better than doing nothing? I feel like we might be penalizing good intentions here.
That is the absolute natural defense mechanism we all have when our systems are challenged.
Okay.
Yes, it is a beautiful expression of generosity. But the text is clear here. Sincerity is the starting line, not the finish line.
Sincerity is the starting line.
The critical insight is that sincerity alone does not guarantee stewardship.
Huh.
Unexamined motion, no matter how pure the intentions behind it, inevitably leads to fragmented work.
Right.
It leads to duplicated resources. You might literally have two different volunteer teams from the same city inadvertently trying to solve the exact same problem.
In the exact same neighborhood.
Exactly, stepping on each other's toes while completely ignoring a massive urgent crisis just 2 blocks away.
Because they never talked to each other.
Yeah.
They just saw a problem, got excited, and ran toward it blindfolded.
Precisely. When unexamined motion takes over, the urgent needs are missed because they are often silent or invisible to outsiders.
Oh.
Meanwhile, resources pour into areas simply because those areas are familiar, or because the advocate for that area is the loudest person in the room.
So the squeaky wheel gets the grease even if it doesn't need it.
Right. And the organization remains emotionally satisfied. They feel like they're doing the work while being strategically negligent.
Strategically negligent. That is a really heavy phrase.
It is.
It really reframes the whole picture. So if throwing our energy at whatever sounds good isn't the answer, what actually is?
Well, that's where the mapping comes in.
Right. This concept of missions ministry mapping is positioned as the antidote. Let's break down what this actually looks like in practice.
At its core, mapping is the disciplined bridge between theology and strategy.
The bridge.
Yes. It's a structured process of answering a series of vital, reality-based questions before anyone takes a single step.
So before we hand out the high fives,
Long before, you have to ask, what is already happening in this environment? Where are we uniquely equipped and called to be?
what are the actual needs?
Exactly. What needs are actually real in this specific context versus what we just assume the needs are?
That's a huge distinction.
And finally, what resources do we truly possess to meet those specific needs?
You know, it reminds me of agriculture. A farmer doesn't just walk out into a completely unknown field, close his eyes, and start throwing seeds in random directions.
Hoping for a harvest.
Exactly, just hoping. He tests the soil pH, he measures the acreage, he studies the historical weather patterns of that specific valley.
He maps the farm.
Right. And doing all of that analysis doesn't mean he lacks faith in the rain. He isn't trusting the seed any less.
No, not at all.
He is just managing his field with the respect it deserves.
That analogy captures the essence of stewardship perfectly. And it's vital to frame it that way because there are a lot of myths and defenses that immediately pop up.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, when you introduce the word mapping or strategy to a mission-driven or faith-based group, people get nervous.
They hear corporate jargon.
Exactly. They immediately assume it's some secular corporate management trick imported from Wall Street to make a spiritual community run like a Fortune 500 company.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm.
The second you bring out a spreadsheet in a ministry meeting, someone is going to accuse you of replacing the Holy Spirit with Microsoft Excel.
Right.
They hear metrics, and they instantly think bureaucracy.
And that assumption is exactly what needs to be dismantled here.
Okay.
Mapping is not a substitute for intuition, and it's certainly not a substitute for prayer. Doing this work mechanically without a spiritual foundation is just arrogance.
It's just a soulless machine at that point.
Exactly. It doesn't claim that human data can capture the entire mysterious movement of human transformation.
Sure.
But it does acknowledge fundamental truth.
Oh.
We are commanded to use wisdom. We are commanded to count the cost before building a tower. Pretending that ignoring demographic data makes you more spiritual is a dangerous fallacy. You are given a mind to observe the reality you are placed in.
Which means looking at a demographic report of your zip code is actually an act of stewardship.
It absolutely is.
It's taking reality seriously. But I want to linger on this friction for a moment. Because it's one thing to say, hey, we should be smart and organized.
Right.
It's another thing entirely to claim that this structured, data-driven mapping approach is deeply rooted in ancient theology.
It's a big claim.
How do we bridge that gap? How is this not just modern efficiency-obsessed management dressing up in religious language?
To understand that, we really have to look at the very nature of how order and purpose are framed historically and theologically.
Okay, take me there.
There is a profound premise in the text. God is not ad hoc.
Ad hoc meaning reactionary, making it up on the fly.
Right. The universe is not a product of scattered improvisation. Providence operates with timing.
There's an order to it.
There are priorities. There is an order to things. Therefore, if an organization or a church claims to be participating in a divine mission, their approach shouldn't be random either.
That makes total sense.
If the source of your mission is not random, Your obedience to that mission cannot be random.
I love how the source material illustrates this by looking at historical precedents. It doesn't just rely on theoretical arguments.
No, it points to actual narratives.
Right. The story of Nehemiah is probably the most vivid example of this.
Nehemiah is the ultimate case study in mapping.
So give us a context there.
The historical context is that he hears the walls of Jerusalem are in ruins and his people are in deep distress.
Okay.
Now, the typical unexamined enthusiastic response would be to immediately show up in the middle of the day, blow a trumpet, hand out hammers, and yell, "Let's build."
Just raw charisma and brute force. And we have good intentions. Let's go lay some bricks right now.
Exactly. But what does he actually do? He grieves. He prays.
He pauses.
He pauses, and then he waits until nightfall. He gets on an animal and quietly rides through the ruins in the dark.
He does an inspection.
A complete physical inspection of the rubble. He surveys the exact extent of the damage, taking mental inventory of the gates, the collapsed stones, the topography.
Before he speaks to anyone.
Exactly, before he ever utters a word about a rebuilding campaign to the public.
He maps the reality of the trauma.
He maps the trauma and the ruin, and taking that silent, analytical night ride wasn't a demonstration of weak faith.
It wasn't him doubting.
No, it was faith refusing to be irresponsible. He intuitively understood that you cannot rebuild what you refuse to measure.
You cannot rebuild what you refuse to measure. Wow, that should literally be framed on the wall of every nonprofit boardroom in the country.
It really should.
And you see the exact same pattern with Paul in the New Testament.
Yes.
He didn't just wander aimlessly around the Mediterranean basin, standing on street corners and shouting the exact same speech into the void to see who would listen.
Paul was a master strategist. He observed the deep cultural nuances of every single city he entered.
He paid attention to the context.
Exactly. When he was in the synagogues, he reasoned using Hebrew scriptures. When he was in Athens, standing in front of Greek philosophers, he mapped their cultural landscape.
Right? He even quoted their own secular poets.
He did, to make his point. He adapted to the terrain. He appointed specific leaders for specific contexts based on their unique needs.
And he didn't just leave them. He came back.
Right. He constantly established feedback loops, returning to cities or writing letters to evaluate how they were actually functioning.
That's evaluation right there.
Yes. He navigated incredible complexity without compromising his core message.
And the ultimate example the text gives is Jesus himself.
Yes.
When he looked at a massive crowd, he didn't just see a demographic. He didn't see a metric of attendance.
He didn't just count heads.
Right. The observations that he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. He diagnosed their specific vulnerability.
He saw reality.
He saw the reality of their condition truthfully enough to actually provide what they needed, not just what was easy to give.
This introduces a really critical phrase from the source: incarnational mapping.
Incarnational mapping.
Yes. The concept of the incarnation is the ultimate expression of this idea. The theological premise is that God didn't save humanity by shouting generic instructions from a safe distance through a megaphone.
He came near.
He took on physical form. He lived in a specific dusty town, spoke a specific regional dialect, and interacted with specific cultural wounds.
So to be incarnational means you have to get close enough to smell the dirt.
You do.
Mapping forces an organization to actually step into the environment.
Yeah.
You can't just throw money at a problem from a high-rise office or a suburban church campus and call it a day.
Because compassion from a distance, without clear seeing, devolves into mere sentimentality.
Just feeling bad for people.
Exactly. You feel bad for someone, you write a check, and you move on. But compassion, combined with clear seeing, becomes strategic.
It changes the action.
It forces you to love people in the reality of their actual lives, not in some sanitized, abstract theory of who you think they are.
Okay, that is incredibly grounding. We've established that this process is deeply rooted in historical incarnational wisdom.
Right?
But here's where we hit a major operational roadblock. Because most leaders would hear all of this and say, well, we already do this.
They think they map.
Yeah, they say we have a 5-year strategic plan. We have planning meetings every October.
But there is a massive structural difference between traditional planning and actual mapping.
The distinction between the two is perhaps the most important operational takeaway. Traditional planning asks a very action-oriented question, what will we do?
Right.
Mapping asks a reality-oriented question, what is real?
Let's visualize this.
Okay.
Planning is making sure the submarine's engine is running perfectly. The crew is fed, the torpedo tubes are loaded, the navigation dials are
Our
polished.
propellers are turning at maximum efficiency.
Exactly. You have forward momentum. But mapping is the sonar.
Ah, the sonar.
You can have the most meticulously planned, highly efficient engine room in the entire fleet. But if you don't send out pings to map the dark, unseen terrain ahead of you, you are just accelerating your way into a trench.
You're just going to crash faster.
Exactly. You need the bounce back of data to tell you where reality actually is.
That is a phenomenal visualization. Planning is fundamentally about execution.
Yes.
It answers the logistical questions. Who is assigned to this task? When is the deadline? How much is the budget?
The moving parts.
Right. Mapping, however, is about alignment. It answers the foundational questions. Why are we doing this at all?
And given the terrain, should we even be moving in this direction?
Which means it is entirely possible to be an absolute rock star at execution and still fail completely.
It happens all the time.
You can have the best marketing, the most beautifully designed flyers, an army of enthusiastic volunteers, a flawless event schedule.
And be 100% misaligned.
Because you are solving a problem that doesn't actually exist in your community.
And this highlights the lethal danger of assumption. Planning that is based on unexamined assumption is just blind confidence disguised as discernment.
Wow, blind confidence.
And confidence feels amazing. It feels like momentum. Let's look at a hypothetical scenario to ground this.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine a community organization holds a planning meeting. Someone says, we need to launch a massive after-school sports program for at-risk youth.
Oh, that sounds energetic.
Right. It looks fantastic on a fundraising brochure. Everyone rallies around the plan. They buy the equipment. They rent the field. They design the logo. They executed the plan flawlessly.
But they never mapped the neighborhood.
Exactly. If they had sent out the sonar, if they had looked at the actual demographic data of their immediate 2-mile radius, they might have discovered something shocking.
Like what?
That their neighborhood has undergone a massive demographic shift over the last 10 years, and it is now primarily composed of isolated elderly widows and retirees.
Oh, wow. So they've built this pristine, fully funded youth sports league, and there are literally no children to play in it.
The need wasn't real, the plan was perfect, but the map was non-existent.
They completely missed the actual urgent crisis of elderly isolation right outside their front door.
Because they were intoxicated by the excitement of their own plan. They executed without alignment.
That is devastating.
And when an organization consistently executes without alignment, the inevitable result is deep systemic burnout. Volunteers exhaust themselves fighting against reality instead of serving it.
Because reality will always win. You can't outplan a bad map.
No, you can't.
So how do we fix the sonar? How does a group actually execute this alignment in the real world without getting bogged down in endless analysis paralysis?
Well, this flows into a very specific operational framework.
The 5-stage mapping life cycle.
Yes, and it's important to note how this life cycle is framed in the source. It is not presented as a rigid bureaucratic machine where you just punch in data and spit out a result.
It's not a formula.
No, it's described as a living rhythm of obedience. It is a biological cycle that feeds itself continuously.
Let's walk through these 5 stages because they are sequential for a reason. Stage 1 is discernment.
Yes.
This is categorized as listening before moving.
Discernment is the vital guardrail against imitation.
Which is huge.
Right, because in the nonprofit and ministry world, imitation is rampant. Someone sees a brilliant, highly successful coffee shop ministry for young professionals in an urban center like Brooklyn.
And they immediately try to copy-paste that exact same model into a rural agricultural town in Idaho.
Exactly. Discernment forces leadership to pause and ask, what is our unique calling here in this specific soil right now?
It breaks the habit of outsourcing your strategy to the latest trendy conference speaker.
It's the discipline of the pause. You stop the machinery.
And once you've paused and committed to listening, you enter stage 2, assessment. This is defined as seeing reality without illusion. And we need to talk about the emotional weight of this stage, because gathering data sounds sterile, but is actually deeply, profoundly humbling.
Humbling is the perfect word. Assessment is where you finally gather the hard, unvarnished facts.
You have to face the truth.
You look at civic demographic reports, you audit your own internal resources, you measure your actual historical impact, not just your intentions.
Which hurts.
It does. And what assessment frequently does is force an organization to distinguish between what is loud and what is actually urgent.
The squeaky wheel phenomena.
Yes.
We always assume the squeaky wheel is the one that's broken and needs the grease. But sometimes the wheel isn't broken, it's just noisy.
Right.
Meanwhile, the axle is silently cracking in half.
Exactly. You might have a specific legacy ministry in your organization, let's say a weekly community dinner. It has the most vocal advocates, it has a dedicated committee, and it takes up 30% of the budget.
It is the loudest thing in the room.
But an honest assessment might reveal that the dinner is mostly attended by people who don't actually need financial assistance,
Wow.
while a silent, marginalized group of non-English speaking immigrants living on the edge of eviction 3 blocks away is entirely ignored.
So assessment strips away those illusions.
It forces you to stare at the truth of the terrain.
And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it, which plunges you right into stage 3 alignment.
The hardest stage.
Yeah, this is the process of bringing coherence to the chaos you just uncovered. And the source material is very blunt here. It states that alignment is, without question, the most difficult stage of the entire life cycle. Why is it so excruciating?
Because true alignment requires renunciation.
Renunciation, the act of rejecting or giving something up.
Yes. Choosing to radically focus your resources on a specific, mapped reality means you must actively say no to other perfectly good things.
You cannot do everything.
The mathematics of time and money simply do not allow it. If you try to do everything, you simply distribute your mediocrity across a wider area.
That is a painful truth.
Alignment forces leadership to look at the assessment data, sit in a room, and say, based on reality, we must focus our energy on this specific crisis.
Which means we have to shut something else down.
Exactly. We have to gently but firmly shut down these other 5 programs that we love.
I have been in those board meetings. They are brutal. People hate saying no to good things. It feels uncharitable.
It causes a lot of conflict.
Someone will inevitably argue, but we've run that summer program for 15 years. My kids went through it.
It feels incredibly uncharitable in the moment, but the deeper truth is that embracing alignment is the discipline of holy limitation.
Holy limitation.
Yes, it is the mature recognition that your organization is finite. You are not meant to solve every problem. Saying no to a good thing to focus on the right thing is the highest form of strategic love.
So you survived the board meeting, you've discerned your calling, assessed the raw data, and made the painful choices to align your focus.
Then comes action.
Right, you hit stage 4 implementation. This is the action phase.
This is where you turn theological conviction into disciplined, calendared action.
The spreadsheets finally come out.
Exactly. Implementation is the unglamorous work of building the schedules, rewriting the job descriptions, reallocating the bank accounts, and establishing clear lines of accountability.
Because without rigorous implementation, the most noble, brilliant vision simply evaporates.
It's just an idea.
You can have the most accurate sonar map in the entire Navy, but if you don't actually turn the submarine's rudder, you're just admiring a screen while you drift.
Vision without execution is just hallucination.
Oh, that's good. Vision without execution is hallucination.
Oh.
And finally, that brings us to stage 5 evaluation, the commitment to learning instead of merely repeating.
Evaluation forces you to ask the terrifying question, did the thing we just implemented actually bear fruit?
Did it work?
Right. Avoiding evaluation is how organizations mistake simple inertia for faithfulness. They keep running a program year after decade because, we've always done it this way, confusing their sheer stubborn persistence with actual effectiveness.
They think survival is success.
Evaluation demands that you look at the outcomes.
But, I can hear the objections forming right now. Does a rigid 5-step cyclical process, assess, align, implement, evaluate, does all this mechanical language eventually suffocate the spontaneity of a passionate community?
That's the fear.
Yeah. If everything has to be evaluated, doesn't it turn a vibrant culture into a sterile laboratory?
It absolutely can if you view it as a secular corporate checklist where people are just cogs in a machine.
Right.
But the synthesis here is beautiful. This life cycle is a continuous circle of wisdom, not a cage.
Okay.
Evaluation is not the end of the line. It feeds directly back into stage 1, discernment.
Oh, it loops.
Yes. You evaluate the results and you immediately ask, what did we just learn about our community and how does this new reality change how we listen and move forward?
It keeps you responsive.
It keeps the organization inherently teachable. It prevents them from becoming fossilized in their own traditions. Structure doesn't kill the spirit. The spirit frequently operates through the vehicle of wise, teachable obedience.
Okay, so if this framework is so liberating, if it keeps organizations teachable and actually effective at helping people, why is it so universally resisted?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because the document dedicates a massive amount of real estate to exploring the psychology of resistance to mapping. And it is fascinating.
It is a profound psychological dive because the resistance you encounter is almost never about the actual logistical process of mapping.
Right.
No one is actually afraid of a spreadsheet. They are terrified of what this spreadsheet is going to expose.
Let's break down these fears. The first major point of resistance is the fear of bureaucracy.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, I deeply empathize with this one. You bring in systems, metrics, and evaluations, and people panic that you're going to replace human warmth with cold machinery.
They think it's going to become clinical.
They fear that a space meant for grace and connection is going to be turned into a DMV waiting room.
It's completely valid fear because we've all experienced cold, institutionalized system.
We absolutely have.
But the counter-argument the text offers is incredibly sharp. Unexamined structure, which literally every organization has, even the ones that claim to be entirely spontaneous, can be far more dangerous than intentional structure.
How so?
An unexamined, chaotic system runs on autopilot for years, relying entirely on the personalities of a few leaders while appearing spiritually innocent.
Oh, right. It feels organic, but it's really just chaos.
Exactly. A well-designed map doesn't dehumanize people. It is the exact tool that ensures marginalized people aren't falling through the cracks of your supposedly warm but chaotic system.
That is a brilliant defense. Chaos isn't more spiritual than order. It just hides its casualties better.
That's exactly it.
The second point of resistance is the profound discomfort with data. And the text roots this deeply in the human ego.
Data is the ultimate ego killer.
It really is.
It is terrifying because it has the power to expose that a cherished, familiar project, perhaps a program founded by a highly influential board member 20 years ago, is no longer bearing any actual fruit.
Ouch.
It takes a monumental amount of humility for a leadership team to look at a data report and admit out loud, we have spent $50,000 and 3,000 volunteer hours on this initiative over the last 4 years, and absolutely nothing has changed. We were wrong.
That is so hard to say. Which perfectly segues into the false security of familiarity. We crave familiarity. It feels like a warm blanket.
It's safe.
You know exactly what the annual fundraiser looks like. You know who is going to bake the casseroles. You know the exact schedule of events. It's predictable.
But the warning here is that familiarity slowly, insidiously becomes a substitute for actual discernment.
To boil it down to its psychological root-resisting mapping is fundamentally resisting the pain of being corrected by reality.
Yes.
People fiercely protect their familiar routines because their personal identity has become entangled with the ministry itself.
That's the danger.
If the ministry is flawed, they feel flawed. But there is a crucial theological anchor here. Truth doesn't just comfort us, it corrects us.
It corrects us.
To reject data and correction under the guise of protecting the culture is almost always a defense mechanism designed to protect the ego of the leaders.
Wow. The truth corrects us. To really cement what happens when a group pushes past this ego, survives the painful board meetings, and actually embraces the data, the source material provides a deeply grounded case study.
Right. The story of the two churches.
It's a narrative that brings all these abstract concepts down to the street level.
Set the scene for us.
The study describes a very generous, active church that prided itself on being a powerhouse of global missions.
Okay.
They had massive budgets, glossy annual reports, and incredibly good intentions. They were funding projects across 4 different continents.
So on paper, they were the absolute gold standard of success.
Totally.
But then, new leadership came in and decided to actually run the sonar. They initiated a mapping process.
Yes. And the mapping revealed a stark, uncomfortable reality. They traced the actual impact of their financial giving.
And what did they find?
They discovered that their funds were primarily going to distant, highly publicized global projects that were already massively overfunded by major international NGOs.
Oh, wow.
They were dropping a teacup of water into an ocean. It made them feel globally involved, but their actual impact was negligible.
And the tragic irony is what they were missing at home.
Exactly. The demographic assessment of their immediate 2-mile radius revealed that while they were looking across the ocean, a massive community of non-English-speaking immigrant families had moved into the apartment complexes quite literally across the street from their building.
Literally across the street.
Right across the street. These families were struggling with basic food insecurity and navigating the local school system, and this mission-minded church hadn't even noticed they existed.
They were entirely blind to the urgent bleeding crisis on their own doorstep because their eyes were fixed on the familiar, comfortable horizon of their legacy programs.
But here is the beautiful part of the case study. When they confronted this reality, they didn't collapse into shame.
They pivoted.
They pivoted. The shift wasn't that they became less compassionate, it's that their compassion became ruthlessly precise.
They initiated the renunciation phase.
Exactly. They carefully redirected their resources away from the overfunded global projects, and they built localized ESL classes and food pantries for the apartments across the street.
They stopped confusing broad sentiment. We care about the world with actual stewardship, which is we are responsible for this specific neighborhood.
Sentiment versus stewardship.
I'm writing that down. And when an organization makes that kind of radical pivot, the old metrics of success no longer apply.
No, they don't.
If you aren't just counting the sheer volume of attendees at a generic event, how do you actually measure if what you're doing matters?
That's the challenge of evaluation.
The source material offers 3 specific qualitative metrics for evaluation that completely change the game.
Measuring transformation is notoriously difficult because you can't put a soul on a scale,
Right.
but you can measure the environment of growth. The first metric they offer is depth of partnership.
Meaning, what is the actual texture of the relationship?
Exactly.
Are these relationships substantial and accountable? Do we genuinely know the names, the struggles, and the stories of the people we are supporting? Or are they just anonymous case studies in a newsletter?
It measures proximity. The second metric is clarity of outcomes.
Okay, clarity of outcome.
Are lives actually being formed and stabilized? Are we seeing tangible changes, like someone gaining employment or a family securing housing? Or are we just funding a perpetual cycle of activity with no actual endpoint?
Are we curing the disease or just perpetually handing out painkillers?
That's exactly the question.
And the third metric, faithfulness to priorities. Does the work reflect a holistic worldview? Is it balanced between immediate compassion, long-term justice, and deep spiritual discipleship?
These 3 metrics force a leadership team to look past the superficial dopamine hit of big numbers.
Because numbers lie.
They do. You can pack 1,000 people into a gymnasium for a giveaway event, but if there is 0 depth of relationship, no clarity on long-term outcomes, and no holistic faithfulness, you didn't execute a mission.
You just hosted a very expensive concert.
Exactly.
All right, we have covered an immense amount of ground. We've dissected the crisis of the treadmill, the theology of order, the submarine sonar of mapping, the 5-stage life cycle, the psychology of our own egos, and the metrics of reality.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is. If a listener is tuned into this right now, maybe sitting in their car or walking the dog, and they are feeling a deep sense of conviction.
Which is common.
Right. If they are realizing, my team is running on the treadmill, we are operating entirely on assumption. How do they actually hit the brakes? What is the very first thing they need to do on Monday morning?
The most comforting aspect of the source material is its emphasis on simplicity for beginners.
Okay, that's a relief.
The text explicitly states, an organization does not need a complicated, expensive system to begin. It simply needs a faithful one.
So no expensive consultants.
No, you don't need to hire a high-priced consulting firm to run your sonar. You can start with a very straightforward 4-step framework.
Step 1 is what they call the conviction audit. And the brilliance of this is that it starts with belief, not the budget. How does a team actually do this?
You literally get the core leadership team into a room with a blank whiteboard, and you strip away all the operational talk.
Just back to basics.
You ask, what are our non-negotiable core theological or philosophical beliefs? Why do we exist? You have to write them down in plain language.
Because without crystal clear convictions, your strategy degrades into mere technique.
Exactly. You have to anchor the why before you can possibly evaluate the what.
So you have the why on the whiteboard. Step 2 is where the pain begins, the commitment inventory.
This step requires absolute brutal honesty.
Let's bring out the spreadsheets.
Yes. You list every single initiative you currently support, every program you run, every dollar you spend, and every volunteer hour you demand.
Everything.
And next to each line item, you ask, why are we doing this? Is this specific commitment actually bearing measurable fruit according to our 3 metrics? Or is it just comfortably familiar?
You put every sacred cow on the table under the harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights of reality.
That's a vivid way to put it, but yes.
And that leads directly to step 3, finding the gaps.
This is the moment of truth. You take the whiteboard from step 1, your conviction audit, what you claim to value most deeply,
Right.
and you hold it up next to the spreadsheet from step 2, your commitment inventory, how you actually spend your time and money.
And you look for the dissonance.
You look for the gap.
If your conviction audit loudly declares that you value local, incarnational community outreach above all else, but your commitment inventory reveals that 95% of your financial budget and volunteer bandwidth is spent on internal, comfortable events for your own members,
You have found a massive, glaring gap.
the sonar has exposed the trench. The map has revealed a total misalignment between your stated theology and your lived strategy.
That is a terrifying mirror to look into.
It really is. So what do you do with that gap? You don't just burn the building down. That brings us to step 4, the 30-day action plan.
Exactly. You don't panic and try to fix 10 years of misalignment in one afternoon. You take one single major insight from the gap analysis.
Just one.
Just one. And you build a highly specific 30-day execution plan around it.
The framework uses the phrase capture, clarify, decide.
You capture the reality of the gap, you clarify the immediate priority required to address it, and you decide on the very next concrete action step.
It forces those vague, overwhelming feelings of, we really need to do better, into an actual calendar invite.
It breaks the paralysis of inertia.
Let's bring this all together. We started this conversation talking about the exhaustion of the treadmill, the seductive illusion of momentum. What this deep dive into missions ministry mapping has illuminated is that being busy is not a virtue if you are running in the wrong direction. Activity is not alignment.
True alignment requires immense courage. It requires the courage to look at the unvarnished data without flinching or defending your ego.
And the humility to say no.
Yes, the profound humility to say no to perfectly good, comfortable things so that you can focus your finite resources on the exact crisis you were called to address.
And it requires the relentless discipline to continuously evaluate the actual fruit of your labor rather than just admiring the sweat on your brow.
It is the terrifying, liberating process of finally stepping off the treadmill, walking out of the gym, and looking at the actual horizon.
That is perfectly said.
I keep returning to a single, incredibly powerful phrase from the text that summarizes this entire philosophy.
What's the phrase?
Love is never lazy. Love pays attention. Matting, at its core, is simply love made intelligent. When you truly love a community, you don't just throw generic resources at them from a distance to make yourself feel better. You do the hard work of paying attention to the exact contours of their reality.
Love pays attention. That is the perfect anchor for everything we've discussed today. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a challenge.
That's a good one.
Think about the organization you lead, the team you manage, or even the way you personally spend your own volunteer hours and financial generosity. Look closely at your calendar and your bank statements. Are you funding, supporting, or spending your energy on something simply because it provides a dopamine hit of familiarity?
Ask the hard questions.
What would actually happen if you loved your goals and the people you were trying to serve enough to turn on the sonar? What would happen if you let reality correct your course? You might lose the comfort of the treadmill, but you might finally start moving forward.